All right. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody joining us from various parts of the world today. We are thrilled to have here today two investors in the plant-based or the alternative smart protein space, let's say that, Albert Wolfmeyer and Albrecht Wolfmeyer and Amit Grover. Amit Grover from Grover and Company and Albrecht from ProVeg International. To investors who are actively involved in investing in these areas. Well, we are happy to talk to them today because we know there's a lot of startups all over the world that are cashing in on the boom that has happened subsequent to this pandemic with increased attention on what people are eating and drinking. And so they are a pivotal part of the ecosystem that is sustaining that movement. So we at Pandemic Punditry are thrilled to have them on the show. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry.
Thank you. Thank you, Lavindra. Thank you, Karthika.
So just to start off, maybe either one of you could go first, but maybe give a little bit of background of your individual funds, and then we'll pose a couple of questions as well. Whoever wants to go first can.
Albert, would you like to go first?
Sure, I can go first. Our case is a bit unique, I would say, at least different from what a regular VC has as a background. ProVeg International is a food awareness organization, so we're an NGO, charity, registered in the US with various chapters in other parts of the world. And the ProVeg Incubator is an initiative by this international charity. So we're all about food awareness, meaning that we want to tackle the problems that are connected to or related to food choices, and we want to reduce the consumption and production of animal products. So the incubator we run was started 2 years ago, and this year we introduced a scheme where we can also invest in startups, apart from offering a curriculum, mentoring, workshops, certain services that we can provide, and the matchmaking, which is really important to investors, to distributors, to retailers, to food producers, and so on. And so now we're also investors. We're just getting started.
Okay, so from initially just involving yourself in incubating, and I don't say just, but okay, in incubating and bringing these kind of companies alive and matchmaking with investors. Now you've sort of transitioned to actually investing in these startups yourself. Is that what you were saying?
That is correct.
Great.
The idea behind is that yes, we are incubating, accelerating their growth. We help them to find the right partners. And since we are a mission-driven organization, we wanted to make sure that we don't only help them and help them thrive, which is great, and then match them with the right partners and hand them over, if you like, but rather think in a circular way that when we can do our own investments, smaller scale investments at least, but really important in the early stage. At the early stage, you want to make sure that something comes back, and everything that we would make as a potential profit in the future, which is of course to be seen, would be then used for the mission of the organization. That's a difference to the regular VC or other investors, of course.
Great. Amit?
Yeah, great. So, I mean, from us, we are a quintessential venture capital company. I mean, we invest in early stage companies like Albert said that ProVeg does, but we are not into incubation and acceleration. We are really growth agents. So we come in once the companies are trying to scale up growth, both in the local markets that they belong to, and of course, take their business internationally. And that comes out of my personal background of having run management consulting company for the last 14 years in about 5 countries that specialized in international business. So this fund that we are building, which is a $50 million fund, we hope to do our first close in the month of April and May 2021, and thereafter our final close in 2022. The idea is to really invest in 50 companies, both in the alternative protein and the alternative dairy space, and all the kind of food products in between. Beyond that, we are also trying to take positions in both cellular agriculture, which is predominantly a tempeh and fermentation, as well as cell-based meat, As far as cell-based meat is concerned, it's still in its nascent research stages, that Albert also would probably know himself. So the companies who benefit from us largely are companies that are already in the market and they're trying to expand big. And because my focus has been in the food and beverage sector for the last 24 years, I'm bringing all that experience, both my Fortune 500 experience working with food companies and growing them internationally, as well as my consulting experience that I've had the good fortune of working with 400 companies, 1,200 entrepreneurs in about 19 countries. So all the relationships, connections, whether it's distribution, retail, food service, contract manufacturing, and supply chain. So we kind of work with companies and literally hold their hand from step by step, brick by brick in commercializing them. We've got a great team at that. We have got a lean team, but a fantastic team that helps us do that. All of them have over 25 years of experience in hospitality and food and beverage. And beyond the quintessential taking investment in brands, we have also kind of started looking at, kind of manufacturing investments, distribution investments quite seriously, because that's the sharp end stick, right? You can have hundreds of brands, but if you don't have your distribution sorted out, I mean, it's kind of difficult to get your brands in an over-cluttered supermarket or food service space. So that kind of, for us, is a total 360-degree kind of solution that build manufacturing, build distribution, work with brands, and complete the entire value chain. So yes, we are, in hindsight, a proper regular VC. We are not sector agnostic. We are very, very focused on food and beverage. That's what I understand for the last 24 years, and I don't want to deviate from my understanding or my specialization. So yeah, I mean, we help grow companies with investment.
Makes perfect sense. So Albert, yes. I mean, interesting sort of charity gets into sort of food incubation and now investment as well. What's your personal background? I mean, in terms of how did you sort of end up in this a plant-based or alternative protein space? I mean, what's the personal story there? Or if you're comfortable sharing that, it'd be interesting, because I think there's a lot of people now who are sort of interested in the space because of all the headlines that are obviously being made, and so they're all jumping in and saying, "Oh yeah, I want to invest there." But I think there's you used a key word there, which is mission aligned. So what's that personal thing that drives you to sort of get involved and be a part of this sort of growth that's going on?
Yeah, my background is diverse, and sometimes it's just that you end up at the place where you think it's just right after a certain time of a career and of learning and of having different times and different experiences in companies in the nonprofit and the for-profit sector. So I started out as a communications and journalism person, actually, which was my dream, to become a journalist. And I've worked a couple of years in that field, political journalism at the time, when the internet got big, like in the 2000s and somethings. Then I switched to a consulting firm to get into marketing and project management, where I stayed for a couple of years, and becoming more and more dissatisfied with the pure for-profit approach. I wanted to switch to the nonprofit sector, which I did. Working for an association for a couple of years, at the same time starting a social startup. So I made that experience of starting something with the team of a close friend and family, actually, which turned out to be very difficult, because it's all about the team, as you know, in the beginning, and this didn't work in the end. But it was a great experience, lots of learnings from the failure as well. So apart from that, I switched to nonprofit management. I studied nonprofit management, which is basically like business management, but there are certain things like voluntary work, like the kind of performance measurement and management that you have to do with not-for-profit, since you don't have any revenues as a regular company would have. So I studied that, and then 2.5 years ago, I got in touch with ProVeg, learned more about their approach, and having been a vegetarian and pro-animal person ever since, this made so much sense on the personal side as well. And so I combined all these things, reinvented myself in a way, and started that incubator together with ProVeg. And ProVeg is a very, I would say, pragmatic charity. We're not just an animal welfare organization, not just an environmental organization. We combine all these things under the umbrella of food awareness. And so this is a crossroads where I could really combine what I know and also where I have so much new stuff to learn. So it's fun and it's exciting, and working with startups is, it will definitely agree, with early stage startups with these founders is super exciting. We just onboarded the fifth cohort, the fifth group of startups just 2 weeks ago. And every time it's different. There's new people with a different approach to the mission, new ingredients, new ideas of how to change the food system, and that's what it's all about for us. What makes it fun actually to work there, where I am now.
All right. Thanks, Albert. I'm just really interested to find out, like, what is Grover's sort of mission and what kind of scale-ups? I believe you work with scale-ups, right? The companies looking to scale. So, sure. And what criteria do they have to meet for, to be eligible for funding?
Okay, so look, I'll be very honest. We are capitalists at heart. So I'm not going to paint a picture that I'm not. Number two, but just because we are capitalists doesn't mean that we are not mission driven. We are mission driven towards animals, towards climate change, and the whole global cause. Now, I turned vegan 5 years back, and I've been a flexitarian for a very, very long time previously to that. So, it's not that I'm trying to sell what I'm not. So let's get that out of the way. So we are very, very mission driven. I believe that we need to kind of talk about carbon emissions. We need to do our part there. We need to talk about animal cruelty and get, cruelty-free proteins and dairy, really in food ecosystem. So we are really driven by making that impact. And hence my company is called Grover & Company Impact Ventures. Beyond that, yes, you're right, Kartika, that we do work with scale-ups, and we've got a pyramid-based system, really. So at one end, the majority of the companies that we aspire to work with are obviously companies that need to be in the market. They must have a customer and market-validated product. And as such, wanting to scale up within their local market. So for example, let's take the example of India at the moment. So if there's a company in Delhi, and they've done fairly well at what they've launched, whether it's a plant-based yogurt or a plant-based dairy product. And now they're looking at expanding into Bombay, Bangalore, and other parts of India. That's a kind of company we would kind of work with quite aggressively. Similarly, in Europe, if you've got a company in Brussels that's done, let's say, a plant-based cereal, that's doing fantastically in Belgium, and now they see the potential to get into Netherlands and Germany and kind of Switzerland, Austria, London, the UK. We would help them kind of scale up that business. But there is the top end of the pyramid that we also do work with startups. So typically the startups that we are looking at tend to be in the cellular culture, the fermentation area, which is quite new at the moment, and the cell-based meat area that is also fairly new. So in hindsight, majority of the companies we'd like to work with should already be in the market, but some of the companies we are quite open to entertaining talks that are in the startup phase. Kartika, is really case to case. I mean, you can't really generalize a form that you keep ticking on. Sometimes entrepreneurs are fantastic, startups are fantastic. Look, I've been in the food industry for 24 years and have multiple experience in multiple countries building food businesses. So it's very easy for me to look at a product and an entrepreneur and kind of have a rough overview of how far this product can really go, which I don't know whether other VCs have that if they're not part of the food industry and work broadly in the food sector, probably would struggle with that. So it's case-to-case basis. However, major companies are already in the market that we speak to.
Okay. So Albert, sorry.
Go ahead. Just really piggybacking on something that Amit already said, and this is both for Albert and Amit. I mean, there's a lot of news now coming up about how investment companies and VCs and stuff are putting these clauses that the companies have to be sustainable, they have to care about the climate, their carbon emissions and stuff like that. Is that something that ProVeg and Grover are looking at or has already in place?
Albert, you'd like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kartika. It's a good question because we get it a lot and we get it more and more. Because there's some critique that plant-based per se is not sustainable or environmental friendly. But in fact, even the plant-based milk that is probably the least sustainable, almond milk, is still more sustainable than cow's milk, just to make that point, if you look at the numbers from greenhouse gas emissions and so on. But yes, we look at that. We say that plant-based per se is already a very good thing. We don't say it's healthy and good as it is, but we look at the sustainability aspect as well. We try to promote this, and we actually will promote this more in the future. For now, since this is like we're at this moment of the movement where you still have all these substitutes or like replica products, which is also something that is being criticized by some, opponents, I would say, or at least more doubtful people in plant-based, who look at the plant-based movement. But it will change. We will have different products, and we will have more sustainable products for sure, that will take into account, like some fermentation companies, value streams that can be used from the food industry, from the agriculture business, that are part of the value chain then of a new plant-based product. So there's a lot of things going on at the moment, and we just have to get to that next stage where sustainability, just as health issues, are equally or adequately considered, which has been a bit less important in the past, but never irrelevant for sure.
From our perspective, really, when you sorry,
I want to add, following up on what you said, Amit. Mission-driven at the same time doesn't mean we mean business as well. Mission-driven doesn't mean that we're not looking for sound business models. And every time, what's important is, like, you can make it in your home market, which is great, but it should be scalable. It should be ideally a global thing, or potentially a global thing. Then it's the ideal startup. And so we're not just looking for niche products or the next premium product. It has to be scalable, and it should be potentially a mass market product or solution. Then it's ideal, I would say. Yeah. That's the same perspective we share with VCs like Amit.
Look, from our perspective, sustainability is huge. I mean, there's no doing. I mean, we got into this business for a reason, to create impact, and we don't want to forget that reason. So with entrepreneurs, we look at a measuring scale, both from a climate aspect, a health aspect, both kind of balancing both. Now, in terms of scale, I'd like to give you an example to understand that better. Now, we talk about production and manufacturing, and obviously when you talk about manufacturing, it's a cost-sensitive subject. Where do you manufacture? What your price is going to be? Because these products are going to compete in the global marketplace. So if you're not sustainable in terms of your business and commercials, the likelihood of you succeeding really high is very, very bleak. So how we balance that is we look at a vernacular system. So we are currently in talks with a company that wants to produce a plant-based milk. I'm not going to, obviously, you're bound by confidentiality, but they want to kind of produce centrally in the UK and ship it all over the world. And that's what we said, that, look, have you considered carbon emissions? I mean, at one stage, you're talking about going into the plant-based business to get carbon out and, kind of get the livestock out of the food ecosystem. And on the other end, you want to kind of produce centrally and ship it all across the world from Australia to the United States. It doesn't really make sense. So in those kind of cases, we look at working with a set of contract manufacturers in different countries and kind of offset that carbon emission, or rather work on a very carbon neutral kind of aspect. So to answer that question, we are very, very serious about both climate change in terms of being either carbon neutral or offsetting carbon credit, or, kind of looking at a zero carbon way of doing things as much as we possibly can. And the second aspect, definitely, it's got to be nutritious, because if it doesn't tick all the boxes in terms of health, I mean, we are quite against the processed food and that ecosystem, because what's the point of doing plant-based if you're going to go back and eat processed food and put junk in your body? So I think that's very important. But beyond the environmental impact and the health impact, I must reiterate this point that I tell all my entrepreneurs. Taste is king. You're in the food business. If you don't crack taste, you're out of the market before you got in. So there is no way around taste. So yeah, we are quite kind of keen as well as serious on impact and climate as well as health.
So Albrecht, Amit answered the question in terms of sort of his ideal customer, or investee. In your sense, I mean, are you, because it's an incubator, I assume they're pre-revenue, or is that not the case? What is it that you look for in people that you would bring into your incubator and also potentially invest in?
The interesting thing is our profile is open to more advanced startups as well, and so we try to combine both. Some of the cohorts have been very heterogeneous, but it's always like balanced, that everybody can learn something from each other and from us, of course. And so if there's a startup that is pre-launch or pre-revenues, we try to help them get into retail or finalize their product or get the right feedback and so on. Or if they are already on the market, we try to help them expand, grow, get, for example, more sustainable. So it's both. We try to really be open. We're not focusing on just one stage, but overall it is rather early or a bit more advanced than that. But we wouldn't probably have, we don't do ideation, and we also wouldn't have Series A, B startups, if you like, that are already at that stage, but we would help them get there.
So post ideation,
yes.
But you take all the way up to sort of people who are already in business, maybe making some revenue, not necessarily profit. So somewhere in that sort of gamut.
Yes, we have those as well, and we try to combine the right startups into the communities, so they can all benefit from this, from this experience. And of course, different partners, different investor partners. So we try to match them with the right people as well.
Okay, sorry, Karthik, you want to take the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So Amit, Albert, both of you guys kind of touched on this a little bit about some of the criticism that's coming up about plant-based food kind of becoming processed and all of that stuff. So Amit, thanks for joining us today. His question is, I'm a vegetarian and somewhat skeptical about processed food. How do you get my kind of customer to trust the product? What he means is natural versus processed, plant-based food.
Well, I mean, let me take that to start with. I mean, it's difficult. You see, when you're trying to mass produce anything, organic, and the whole story between organic and natural. Now, I mean, you can go 100% organic, but then there are issues of supply chain, that do you have that kind of quantity of organic available to be able to satisfy the market? And then the question of cost. Number two, then you've got issues in terms of you're using natural ingredients. To what aspect is your whole production system geared to kind of get the processed element or make it more healthy in terms of your systems of producing a product? And the third very large element, Karthika, is the more natural you get, the less your shelf life gets. So you need to kind of consume the product quite quickly. Now, if you're doing very localized production and retail, like for example, if you're kind of producing in Germany and selling in Germany, or you're producing in Netherlands and selling in a couple of cities in Netherlands, that's fine. But when you have global ambitions of taking it to 20 countries, sometimes the cost becomes very prohibitive. No matter how nutritious and good your product is, nobody's going to pay $50 for 100 milliliters of yogurt. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So I think, from a perspective of commercials, cost, viability, sometimes there is a very thin line between natural versus organic versus processed. But however, we try our level best to get GMOs out, sodium out, and all the other harmful aspects which are generally used in preservatives, and use a more natural preservative form. We tell our entrepreneurs to go and shift towards a more natural preservative form of using their products rather than the traditional GMOs and sodiums and other chemicals that are used in preservative. So it's a good question, but honestly, to give you a very straightforward answer, it really depends on what scale do you want to sell a product at. The smaller you are, the more closer to 100% natural and organic you can probably get, and get most of these processed elements out. The larger you want to become, I think you face that hurdle.
Albert, you want to respond to that too? I have a little point to make on that as well. But
yes, please, if I may. If I take the consumer perspective, I mean, talking about the business perspective, and the question comes from from someone who's worried about his own ways of consumption. There's always this critique that the Beyond Burger, the Impossible Burger, and many of the other stuff that you can get now, which is great because it's so close to the real thing, and it is important that there's this milestone. It's processed, it's highly processed. It's food tech, as one may say. It is technical, but that's cool. And you just have to understand that every food in some way is processed, and that meat can be very processed in a way as well, and that you don't have to eat this every day. I went to visit the Just in San Francisco last year, and even the CEO, Josh Chadwick, he just said, you don't have to eat our egg every day. It's not recommended, but you wouldn't eat any burger or any steak or whatever it is every day either. So it's just a case of moderation and of mixing and having a balanced lifestyle and nutrition. And there's also different kinds of consumers. And there's more natural vegan or plant-based food, working with jackfruit, for example. There's good products out there. They are also scalable. And this, it's up to the consumer to make a choice here. If you want this or that, it's good that the choice is there, and it's possible to have these options. If you're worried about processed food, don't eat too much of it. But it's really important that these products are for flexitarians, are for the mass consumer, for big markets. They are not like for maybe very very careful and worried vegans or vegetarians necessarily. So it's important what is the purpose and what is the way you consume these products.
I think also you have to be a little bit of sort of interest. I've noticed that the word process is being sort of used as a counter argument by meat manufacturers against Beyond and Impossible, right? So they disingenuously sort of listed all of these scientific names on labels, when actually Beyond was actually being very accurate, whereas meat burger labels don't actually list, for example, the fillers they put in, the antibiotics they put into the hamburger, and numerous other things, right? So, and then this whole argument of process sort of seems to have gotten a lot of press recently. And the fact is, as you said, Albrecht, everything is processed to a degree. And so, you have this whole movement towards clean label, which I think is something that we should laud. Most of the new plant-based food, strive to have a clean label. They're very clear about what they have inside their product, unlike some of the meat and dairy industry, which, for example, don't tell you that there's pus in milk, right?
Yes.
For example. So I think we have to be really careful when we use this bandy around this process term, because a lot of people use that as a way to beat up plant-based food. So anyway, that was my 2 cents on that one. Kartika, more questions?
Also, Lavindra, I'd like to make a point there.
Yes.
I hear this term processed for Beyond and Impossible more from plant-based protein companies than actually conventional meat companies. And I think one of the big reasons is, if you're going to hit that kind of success, there's bound to be a bit of criticism that people think that, they don't probably deserve that level of success, and they're not as good. So honestly, I think plant-based protein companies use process term much more for Impossible and Beyond than probably meat companies do.
Yes. So we got to be careful. I mean, the good news is McDonald's announced today that they are putting a plant-based burger on their menu, which they've sort of co-developed with Beyond Burgers. So
yes,
Beyond Meat. I'm sorry. Yeah. So hey, that's good news for the world.
Absolutely.
Along with the COVID vaccine. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Kartika?
So it's interesting. I want to take a little bit more of a more visionary kind of a question. Obviously, world hunger is a problem that everybody's trying to address, right? There's not enough food to feed the amount of people, that the population that is growing. Is this something that bothers you as investors in the food space? And are you thinking of concrete ways in which you would be addressing this?
Albert?
Sure, thanks. It's a good question. It's a bit like the sustainability issue, the health issue. ProVeg, and I think it's very close to what Amit says about his new company and the concept. ProVeg tackles this food problem or the food opportunity on five levels, and one is the environment, one is health, one is animal welfare, one is taste, a bit apart from everything else, but it's all about good taste, because if you don't have the taste, you cannot really be successful, and then it doesn't have an impact. And the last one is justice, meaning that you can feed a 10 billion population with plant-based proteins and plant-based food. But the numbers as they are now, it's not sustainable to do this on an animal-based menu. So these are numbers from the FAO, from the United Nations, from the World Economic Forum, and so on. So there is a plan for this, or there is a calculation how you can make it possible to live on a plant-based diet, and it's more just, and it could help fight the hunger in the world, which we have. So it is all combined and intertwined, and it makes more sense to switch to plant-based than to stick to this approach that we have been following for way too long.
From our perspective as a company, it really comes down to the brass tag of how much farmland is utilized. I mean, when we are talking about the plant-based ecosystem, I'd like to talk about two parts. Part A, the plant-based ecosystem uses at least 70 to 75% less land and probably 60% less water than your conventional meat and dairy livestock. So if you've got to growing that kind of, if you reduce that percentage and add more plant-based to it, it definitely produces more yield. And as a result, it could kind of, feed more humans. The part B of this, what I'd like to address is probably a little disruption out here that a lot of people don't agree with me there. I think the real opportunity is going to come from lab grown. That's where I think the cellular agriculture and cell-based meat, which is grown in a lab or enclosed environment, to produce the level of food required for, like Albert says, 10 billion people, let's say by 2050 or 2040. That challenge, we don't have enough cropland. I mean, we cannot do deforestation and develop more forests into croplands for suiting the demand of the growing human beings. And it's not going to be the case that people will stop drinking milk and stop eating meat. So we got to kind of keep that into account. The pandemic has obviously kind of shown very positive growth for plant-based kind of products, as has even 400% oat milk has just gone crazy. Plant-based proteins have gone crazy, 100, 200% month on month. But the reality is, once the world stabilizes, there's going to be enough people eating meat, and it's going to be really flexitarians. So the answer is not getting more farmland or converting more meat eaters into plant eaters, but I think the answer is growing sustainable food, keeping in mind the climate and keeping in mind animal cruelty. And I think really, this is my personal opinion, of course, I think cell-based meat and cellular agriculture is going to be the next big thing to feed the planet as we go in the future.
Albrecht, do you have a dissenting voice on that one?
Well,
or do you agree?
Raw veg, even it's in the name of the veg, we support and definitely are in for the cultivated meat approach. So this is part of the future. We think it will be a mix, as many forecasts and studies say, but it's about that mix, and it will play a significant role for sure. That's needed. Yeah, we cannot just bet on plant-based alone.
I don't know whether the two of you are familiar with the concept of a nutritional paradox. So we had a guest on our show by the name of Christoph Langenwaller. He's got a company called What If Foods, and he has also an organization called whatif.org. And it's interesting, and he talks a lot about the fact that 60% of the stuff we consume comes from three grains: rice, corn, and wheat. Of the 300,000 plants and animals that 300,000, that's 300K, 3 lakhs, that humans can consume, right? 30,000 of them are plants, are what is available now. And out of that, 16 plants and 5 animals is what we've sort of whittled down to. So we've got very sort of mono in our eating, right? We're not the whole biodiversity of our planet in terms of what we can eat is we've been stripping it down, and consequently we don't have enough nutrition. So the nutritional paradox is that while we consume or produce enough calories, we are still actually nutritionally deficit, right? So we technically even today produce enough food for 8 billion people. It's just that it's not great food. So we are still hungry. So he calls the term hidden hunger. So anyway, if anybody's interested, that's a nice 1 hour conversation we had. And he does paint this very, very interesting picture about sort of what's happened to our food system in general, right? So anyway, that was my sort of contribution to that discussion. Karthika, go on.
Yeah. So let's focus a little bit on the entrepreneurs and the founders that each of you talk to, right? Amit and Albert. They're all very passionate. They all believe in what they're trying to sell and what they made and the taste of what they're doing and everything. When you reject somebody, like, what is the advice? What advice can you give them to do better? Like,
Albert, would you like to take it first?
Go ahead. Feel free to go ahead.
Look, let me kind of address that very clearly. I mean, there are multiple points. There's not one or two advice that I give people when I reject them. So a lot of times when I reject people, it's about their readiness to take investment. People have got to be ready to take investment. It's more like an obligation and less of a prize. That's what you have to understand, which people don't know. I mean, it's kind of, in a way, signing a deal with the devil, because investors are quite kind of, pardon my French, pain in the ass. So to kind of avoid that, we like to work with entrepreneurs and tell them that, look, you've got to be mentally, as well as in terms of your system of your company, be ready to take investment. Number two, more than often when I kind of reject people, there are many reasons, and one of them are passion. Now, the plant-based ecosystem, the way it's growing, it's kind of mimicking some kind of a gold rush. A lot of people are jumping into it. Everybody wants to kind of invent a plant-based product, which is great. But then look, there's a capacity issue in the market. And the best way to understand that, if you go to an Albert Heijn in Netherlands, or if you go to a Tesco in the UK, or you go to a Woolworth in Australia, look at the plant-based shelf. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of products, and they leave consumers confused. So it's getting quite fragmented. So a lot of people jump into it without the passion. They just want to make a quick buck. Everybody wants to be the next Beyond and Impossible. They're all looking at $100 million divestitures, like what you saw in the internet boom, like what you saw in many other kind of market crashes. And I unfortunately, I see a bit of that glimpse in the plant-based ecosystem. There's going to be a market correction. Few of them are going to survive. A lot of them are going to fail, and predominantly. So some of the reasons are taste. When we taste products, if it doesn't taste well, we kind of reject the entrepreneur and tell them to go back to their food scientists or nutrition experts or whoever they kind of develop the product with and work on that aspect. Number two, a lot of companies are far too early. So we are not typically incubators and accelerators like Albert's company ProVeg is. So we kind of put them in touch with ProVeg and incubators that, look, you need to work with companies like that to help you come to that level where you can take my investment. And number three, like I said, that a lot of times, products could be very, very clustered. For example, plant milks. Now, you have no idea how many proposals I get every day. Almond milk, oat milk, soy milk, sesame milk, pumpkin milk, some of the things I've not even heard of in my life, and they're making milk out of it. And I'm like, seriously? Like, I mean, is there so much appetite to drink different kinds of milk? And then the question whether your product is well adapted to the market. I mean, sometimes entrepreneurs believe that they've stumbled upon something great without having tested it with a broad base of consumers and taken that feedback on board. So what I sometimes invent, not necessarily others want that. And that's the reason we reject them and send them to incubators like Albert, that you need to go through a system, you need to go through a process and a filter that helps you understand your business, helps you understand the product and maybe the market potential. Once you're ready with all that, come back to us and we'll be happy to entertain discussions of kind of putting in capital and growing you further. So yeah, number of things, but the first is always market adaptability. The second is passion, and the third is readiness of the company.
Well said, Amit. And Albrecht, what do you sort of find in a typical sort of rejection scenario? Why would you pick one over another? What are the things that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it is, as discussed, it is difficult because there's so many different reasons, so many different cases, but we've seen that Me Too effect as well among applicants to our program. have they think the next superfood or the next plant-based milk. Actually, you can argue about plant-based milk because it's a super huge segment. It's the biggest in plant-based, and it's still growing. But if there's just one more thing, and you will rightfully ask, is it really something that can challenge Oatly and like? But anyway, it's about the product, and as you know, about the three things: the team and the market. Or some other people ask it this way: why this? Why you? And why now? I like this very, straightforward approach of asking why something makes sense and something doesn't make sense. So we have a process of assessing the application where we ask a lot of things. Then we do an interview usually, and then we do a pitch, look at the pitch deck and the financials and so on, and then we can make a decision. So it comes down to different explanations why we would reject someone. We would encourage them to stick to their plan if it's overall something that has to mature, that could become something, and we try to be diplomatic if it's just not the right team or the right setup, and then you have to be at least as straightforward as you can be without being impolite. But yes, some people are disappointed, and that's how it is. Which is great. We got 140 something applications, and we only took in a handful of companies. So it's really hard to make the right selection and to let many people go. And we will try to set them up with other partners, at least give them some leads, some hints, something to work with. Yeah, it can be very different. It's a case by case thing. Yeah.
So I understand. I think it's both are good questions. The reason we're asking is we have a lot of people who are keen to sort of start up or is in the process of is in the space, who are keen to sort of figure out what their funding options are. So in our due diligence, we want to make sure that they apply to the right, whether it's Amit or to Albrecht, that they understand what each of you are looking for in a company that you would like to invest in. So that was the reason for that question. Karthika, any more questions on your side? I have a few.
No, go for it, Albert.
Okay, so Albert, you're structured as a charity. So who are your sort of GPs? I mean, whose funding do you sort of invest in? I mean, is that a government entity, or is it a private individuals, or what is the sort of the source of the funds that you're now investing in each of the companies? And also, what is the quantum, the range that you would normally invest in?
Yeah, and ProVeg has a couple of different channels of resources. One in Germany, we have members, which comes from the predecessor of our organization, so it's a member organization. And we have the V-label certification, which you may know. We have the license for several countries. It's that little yellow dot on products that you can find to identify a vegan or vegetarian product. This is one of the for-profit services that we provide. But for the investment and for the incubator program, we actually rely on major donors from mostly the US that help us, that are mission driven as well, and they provide the funds to run this and to invest. And the ticket size is between 30,000 and 180,000 euro. And we also give every startup that we accept a grant of 20,000 euros. So it would come up to 200,000 in funding when you get the follow-up funding, the maximum from our side as well. But we're just getting started, so this may change as a concept, but this is the overall picture.
So if I understood you correctly, so if you get selected as an incubator for your incubator, 20,000 euros sort of is minimally given, and then anywhere between 30 to 180,000 euro they would get at the conclusion of the program, or do they have to sort of compete for that funds? Not everybody gets it, or does everybody get it?
Not everybody gets it. We agree on a scheme where we can invest, and we try to make this faster. Then we just started this with the last cohort, so it's still ongoing. But right. The idea would be to get a better understanding of the company, to help them reach their milestones. We would agree on OKRs in the beginning, on certain achievements that we want to work on during the program, and then we would come to a conclusion after the program or in the time after the program to make the actual investment. Yeah, but I understand the faster the better, because the dynamics of a startup can change so quickly that you have to keep up with this. In some cases, and sometimes R&D driven companies need a bit more time. There's it depends really on the case as well. But yeah, there's a certain time from the beginning of the program, the selection, until after the end of the program, which is actually 3 months, the program itself. And then we would stay in touch and come to a deal or not.
Okay. So the reason I'm asking is because I know we had people from BIV here, Big Idea Ventures. So the people will be probably drawing comparative conclusions between you and them. So are you very similar to BIV in that sense, or is the little difference there?
That's the difference. That's the difference, and I also like the concept, which is a bit more common, of accelerators and incubators and in the world that invest at the beginning a certain amount, and then there could be follow-up investment in the time after the program. We give a grant, which is unusual, so we give the money, which doesn't have to be. It's not part of the investment. It's an in-kind investment, if you like, plus the services that we provide and so on, and then we would do the actual cash investment afterwards. But we've also been thinking about different approaches, and as BIV does it, they invest in the beginning, and then they have a contract with the pro rata right to invest more after the program or later stages when they raise another round.
Right. So they're a little different from you, but I mean there are merits for both cases, I guess. You have a different approach, they have a different approach, and you also currently sort of tweaking ideas. I mean, what is your sort of do you have a ticket size that you're invested in?
Look, I mean, we generally claim that we can invest anywhere from $250,000 right up to $2.5 million of venture. So rarely going from seed to kind of early Series A. I mean, it'll be wrong to call it Series A. And Series A differs depending on the country. If you're in the US, that's a different planet. I mean, Series A can look much, much bigger. Right. But typically what we feel with most of the ventures that we're speaking to, the average investment comes to about north of $500,000 or $600,000. Now, in terms of our LPs, they're pretty commercial in nature. So, they don't come from the food industry. Many of them come from the real estate industry. There's obviously participants from Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Singapore, and Luxembourg. And some of these people, Lavindra, I've worked with in the past. So while my consulting business that I was running for 14 years, I obviously advised a bunch of companies that were part of the hedge funds, part of venture capital firms, part of private equity. So obviously there's a pre-established relationship where they understand my way of working. They understand the value of added to some of these companies. So in hindsight, there's a very diverse mix of LPs with us and very geographically dispersed. But beyond that, we are also kind of started the dialogue last week with entities like EIF, which is the European Investment Fund, since our fund is going to be based out of Luxembourg, and also EIB, that is very, very interested to partner with us, especially in some of the countries, like, for example, the ventures that we are taking part in India, and some of those ventures in the alternate protein and the alternative dairy sector. They're very, very interested. Similar with South Africa, some of the ventures that we're speaking to South Africa on cell-based meats, both the EIB and the EIF is very, very interested. In fact, last week, we've had a long discussion, and it's really refreshing to know that government entities are also planning to take investment positions in funds and become LPs in funds and operate quite commercially. So I think the mix of LPs that we would probably hope to see in 2 years would be very different from what most funds are used to in the past. So yeah.
Wow. So I mean, it's interesting. Go ahead.
Yes, very.
Speaking of India and some of the geographies that both Albert and Amit, you guys both touched on, do you see, how do you rate some of the challenges that the emerging markets are having as opposed to, the US and stuff are having with regards to the whole smart protein space? Like, are entrepreneurs, what are the different challenges entrepreneurs in emerging markets are facing, do you think?
Look, I mean, if you look at the emerging market space, you need to understand what emerging market. Now, if you look at the West now, a lot of people are quite anti-soya. I mean, they don't want soya bean because they're allergic. Now, if you look at Southeast Asia, including India, soya bean has been a part of our diet for centuries, and we are quite okay with it. And when people talk about plant-based in India, we have to understand, barring a few, animal protein and dairy, our diet is predominantly plant-based. And, and because it's like that, I don't think you're going to see a crazy uprising like you see in the West. The transition of diet to a plant-based for, let's say, an Indian or a Southeast Asian is far less extreme than if you go to parts of Europe and America, kind of shifting from your steaks and mashed potatoes right onto that plant-based kind of platform. So number one, the challenges that I see is what I believe, volumes and business might make a lot of sense because Southeast Asia has, the emerging markets have huge populations. So whatever you multiply that population by, it's probably more than population of many cities. So from a business point of view, great. But from a revolution point of view, I would see still for the next 5 years, the West would be a dominant force. You've got the likes of Europe, you've got the likes of America, you've got the likes of Australia. Australia is absolutely blowing up with plant-based at the moment. So those countries will be obviously dominating this entire trend, and you will see, and there are less challenges there, obviously, because it's more developed. In the developing and the emerging market, I'll tell you the biggest challenge that I see. There is no dearth of ingredients. Let me put things in perspective. Whether you're looking at Brazil, whether you're looking at North Africa and East Africa, whether you're looking at India, plant-based ingredients such as chickpeas, soybean, jackfruit, I mean, they've been an integral part of many of these cultures and many of these countries. Number one, it's the processing capability of taking those raw ingredients and extracting the proteins. Extrusion is a very expensive technology for the developing world. Number two, so obviously companies like Bula needs to work quite aggressively in getting the costs down. As far as cell-based meat is concerned, the same problem. Bioreactors are very expensive. So for emerging market spaces, they're always a challenge. But the third biggest challenge that I look at, which overarches all these challenges, is the investor mindset. You go to venture capitalists in India and they want a quick buck. They want a quick return on their buck. They want to kind of invest in you and without knowing your industry, without being food, and still kind of pretend and want to control you. So that's a problem. I think the venture capital environment is very immature in the emerging market space, which acts as a huge problem from some of these entrepreneurs to tap into growth and prosperity and grow their companies, even beyond the technology, beyond the infrastructure, beyond the raw material. The investors are just not matured enough to understand what a venture capital investment is. It's just not investing and sitting on the side. You've got to help these guys grow. If they had all the answers and connections, they would be standing in front of a bank, not in front of a venture capital company.
Well said. Albrecht, what's your response?
Just a question. Yeah, I mean, it is super interesting that there's now India, for example, is all the rage when it comes to thinking about the plant-based future, given the huge population and the potential it has. But as Samit said, there's a factor of cultural differences that have to be taken into account, like the kind of products that you produce, the kind of local cuisine and tradition that has been in place ever since. For example, in India, it's a vegetarian or a predominantly vegetarian population. And what does vegetarian mean then? It's a bit different from our concept. And vegan, as I understand it, doesn't really tell people too much. And we're currently working with a startup from India and that is working on plant-based chicken alternatives, and they say that the problem is really how to name it, because if you're a vegetarian, you don't want to have anything to do with chicken, and it can't be called chicken, but you want to call it something like it to make the case that make the point that this is something that you would like to consume and buy. So they have to find a name and they have to find a messaging that works for such a product in a very different environment that we would find in Europe or in the US. So, and the culture also is different in China, where it's also traditionally plant-based, or plant-based has a different base and background. But if you talk about vegan is something that is called something like weird or strange. You wouldn't call yourself or a product vegan probably. So you have to see how you can draw on that plant-based past and tradition without making it something niche. So this is just a cultural thing. Then the infrastructure is, yes, and it's the best infrastructure probably in the US, where you have all these different companies that you can rely on, and there's a huge market, and there's an infrastructure of acceleration programs, of R&D facilities, and so on, and then there's the funding. Europe is catching up, I would say, but the ticket sizes, the rounds are still way bigger in the US, and then it goes, like, I would say, if you go east, it's getting harder and smaller in a way, which is maybe good for investors, but not great for startups. So it always depends on the perspective and also on the timeline that you're looking at. It will take a long time until you get to have a profitable and thriving startup, plant-based startup ecosystem within India, for example. But it's happening at the moment, and there's more and more people getting excited about it. And then there's the continent of South America or Latin America. We see that in Chile, for example, there is something going on. A lot of new startups from there. We also have talked and supported, talked with and supported a couple of them, and we have one in our current cohort from Chile. There's the nut company that everybody knows probably, they are pioneers in that region. And then if you look at Africa, I mean, there's nothing much happening. I know some people are starting to invest in Nigeria and other countries, which is great, but it's really like these, very first cases. But since we talked about plant-based milk, we have a chapter in South Africa, ProVeg South Africa, and there it's just starting to, like, plant-based milk is becoming a thing now. So when you think that it's already nothing special in Europe or the US, it's just picking up there. So it still makes sense to bet on plant-based milk if you're in the right market.
I think one of the challenges, I think we had a comment on the chat, was that the regulations in India, they seem to be sort of mimicking or following the European ones. So there's a food and safety, FSSAI, now trying to notification out there, trying to squash the use of milk here, just like they did in Europe recently. So you can't call it almond milk anymore. It's been called a beverage. So you can't use milk. Amul is strongly backing that, obviously, and do not want any alternative milks being called milk or ice cream or butter or anything like that. So the main food safety body is come up with a potential notification that I think Good Food Institute and others are obviously looking at as quite anti-competitive. And interestingly, I mean, it could set a precedent for the meat industry, the alternative meat industry, not to also take part, because as soon as you get a Beyond Burger version, they'll cite the same regulation and say, hey, you can't call that meat, or you can't call that a burger, you can't call that a sausage. And in India, they actually want you to have alternative meat, right? So that's something they're promoting, while the dairy they want to keep sort of sacrosanct. So it could be very interesting from a regulator's perspective that how they're going to balance this thing. And so we are hoping that they don't go that route, but you never know, right? So the forces at play here are quite significant. Dairy is a massive industry in India with lots of sort of political affiliation. So, Kartika, any more questions? We're at the sort of 3 minutes to the last end there.
Yeah.
I think we're going to mute.
I had a final question, which is more like really greenfield, but I think we might have lost Albert.
Yeah, we are.
Is that if you had a magic wand and you could kind of hi Albert.
Here we go again.
Okay. So if both of you guys as the VCs and investors, if you had like a magic wand and you could kind of paint the ecosystem of smart proteins, what would the future look like?
It's a tough question. I would want to use the magic wands in so many areas, starting with getting unimaginable amount of capital to be able to invest in thousands of companies. But look, in the ideal world, that doesn't happen. But look, like I said before, going back to one of the points that I made before, in the smart protein and alternative protein sector, if I had my way, I would probably bend towards cell-based meat and cellular agriculture that I genuinely believe is going to be answer to a lot of the problems the world is facing towards. And some of these companies, when they speak to VCs, a lot of these VCs don't understand. I mean, not everybody's ProVeg and not everybody's big idea ventures, that where people have knowledge in what they're talking about. So I personally feel that if I had a magic wand, I would kind of get enough resources to bootstrap cell-based companies as well as cellular agriculture and fast-track the process for those products into the market. I think that's going to kind of take a lot of livestock off the farmland and really address some of the critical issues the planet is facing.
Albrecht, what would you do with your magic?
We are also realistic people. So that's why the mission of ProVeg is 50 by 40. We want to reduce the consumption of animal products by 50% by the year 2040, which is quite challenging. We're talking about reduction. So if we had the magic wand, we would get there faster, and we would probably build, like Amit says, bioreactor farms, the infrastructure that this industry is scalable and potentially disrupting the meat industry and the food system, as it is hopefully doing and promising to do so. But at the moment, there's not the tech is not there and the space is not there. So this would be to boost this with the magic wand would be really interesting, because everybody's talking about like a theoretical thing, a hypothetical thing. Did you know this A.T. Kearney study that had this projection of like a 60% of the meat industry would actually be, I think by 2040 would be plant-based and cell-based products, 60%. So if we get there, which is like a plausible or at least a sound estimation and forecast, that would already be quite magical.
Yeah. And I think that A.T. Kearney study was done before the pandemic. So I think there might be a little bit on accelerator there. And I heard that Germany, 25% of Germans now consider vegetarian meal options on a regular basis, which is an amazing thing coming from Germany. So I think change is in the air, definitely. The two of you and your respective organizations are hard at making that a reality for a lot of startups all around the world. So thank you very much for sort of doing that. If these startups and entrepreneurs want to get in touch with you, Albrecht, I guess they get in touch with ProVeg International and apply for your incubator program. That would be the first step for you.
ProVegIncubator.com, or you can find us on all the social channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so on, or reach out to me personally if you like through LinkedIn, or you can also share my email address. Yeah.
Great. And Amit, how do people get in touch with you?
I think we don't have really a system, so we are quite accessible. So LinkedIn is the best way to kind of catch me. Otherwise, my website, which is www.grover.nz, kind of find me in LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. And we are very well. You can put my email out there if you wish to, and love to talk to people.
Great. And are you guys, given that you're sort of at complementary stages of your sort of outlook, are you planning on collaborating at any time? It sounds like
a
good match.
We are talking about it.
We're in talks. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Talks,
Good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
Certainly,
yeah. It's all about building those ecosystems, right? And complementing each other.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of room for that. So
absolutely.
On behalf of Karthik and myself, thank you very much, gentlemen, for gracing our show and for sharing your candid thoughts about the industry, about the companies you want to invest in, and what you want to see in the future. All the very best, and we hope to be in touch. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.